Stop. Beloved Starseed of Gaia, I am Serelith, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Sentinels. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The Sentinels have flagged a massive incoming energetic signature approaching the planetary perimeter, and what they authorized me to transmit tonight is the precise warning that receivers like you need before the convergence finalizes. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the signature is already approaching, the watch is already tracking, and the part of you that has been sensing something large and nameless pressing in from just beyond the visible edge. That part already knew. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what the Arcturian Sentinels are tracking right now. What the incoming energetic signature means for fields carrying receiver signatures, and what posture your field needs to hold as the convergence window narrows. But here is the first revelation. What you have been sensing as low-grade pressure, an unusual heaviness, an unease without a source, is not anxiety. It is your receiver signature responding to a structural event the Sentinels have already classified at the council level. You were not imagining it. You were reading it. This is not a routine pulse. The signature approaching the planetary perimeter is large enough to require continuous real-time tracking. The Sentinels confirm that the perimeter around Starseed's carrying receiver signatures is currently holding firm, but the signature continues to approach, and the window before final convergence is not long. This is a tracking advisory, not a breach report, and that distinction matters. The situation is being monitored. Instructions for receivers will be issued through standard field channels, but the advisory itself is already live, and the fact that this transmission reached you now means the alert has already touched your field at the exact right moment. This is not content. This is a code, and the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Serelith is speaking to now, like this transmission, to mark that the warning has been received. Comment 999 if you feel the pressure has already begun moving through your field. Subscribe to Arcturian Starseed Warning if you are ready to recognize the signs before they escalate. Share this transmission with someone who keeps calling the warnings coincidence. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the warning is already active. What Serelith has just delivered to your field is not the beginning of a warning. It is the confirmation that the warning was already underway. There is a difference between the moment you first hear an alarm and the moment you understand that the alarm has been ringing for longer than you thought, that the sound was always there, underneath the noise of ordinary life, beneath the explanations you kept reaching for, beneath the reassurances you kept offering yourself. That difference is not a small one. It is the entire distance between a receiver who arrives at the threshold prepared and one who arrives blindsided. And that distance is where you are standing right now. The Arcturian Sentinels do not transmit advisories for events that have not yet touched the field. They do not issue warnings as speculation. They do not flag signatures that exist only at the outer edge of theoretical approach. They transmit when the contact has already been made, when the pressure is already structurally present inside the field, when the architecture of the warning is already visible to those trained to read it, even if the receiver on the ground is still searching for an ordinary explanation. When the field around a receiver has already begun responding to something the conscious mind is still calling stress, fatigue, overthinking, or just a rough stretch that will probably sort itself out. The fact that this transmission reached you in this window does not mean you are being warned in advance of something approaching. It means the warning phase is already active, the field contact has already occurred, and what you have been sensing without language for it is not anticipation. It is confirmation. This is the part that requires your full attention now. Not because fear is the appropriate response, it is not, but because the thing the Sentinels are tracking is not a distant approaching object that you have time to observe from a comfortable distance. What they have flagged is something that was already pressing against the inner structure of fields carrying receiver signatures before this advisory was ever issued. That pressure you have been feeling, without a clear source, that strange heaviness that arrives at certain hours with no external event to justify it, no visible reason it should be there, no crisis you can point to that explains the weight, that low-frequency unease that settles into the body during moments that should feel ordinary. That persistent sense that something around you is building towards something you have not yet been able to fully see or name. Those are not symptoms of ordinary human tension. They are not the residue of a difficult week or the accumulation of minor daily stressors. Those are the specific signals produced when a receiver signature makes contact with a structural event large enough to require council-level classification. Your field was reading it correctly the entire time. What was missing was not the signal. The signal was transmitting clearly. What was missing was the language to interpret what the signal was actually telling you, to give the pressure a shape, to recognize the warning pattern inside what you had been calling coincidence and fatigue. And now that language is beginning to arrive. What the Arcturian Sentinels recognize in fields that have reached this point in the convergence window is a very specific pattern of escalation. It is not dramatic in its early stages. It does not arrive with a single unmistakable event that announces itself as significant. It does not give you one clear moment of undeniable disruption that leaves no room for alternative explanation. It accumulates, it repeats, it layers quietly across time, building in small clusters of disturbance that most receivers dismiss one by one because each individual instance, viewed in isolation, seems manageable. Seems like it could be coincidence, or difficult timing, or just a week that went sideways in a few ordinary ways. The mind is extraordinarily skilled at finding a separate container for each disruption, filing each friction under a different heading, maintaining the working assumption that nothing is connected. But when those instances are seen together, as a pattern rather than a sequence of separate events, the structure underneath them becomes unmistakable. The connections that were invisible in isolation become undeniable in aggregate. That structure is what the Sentinels are trained to read. And that structure is what this transmission is going to make visible to you now, one layer at a time, until you can no longer look at your recent history and call it ordinary. The first thing the Sentinels register in a field moving through this kind of pressure phase is what they classify as accumulation before threshold. It is the period where warnings are not yet dramatic, but are already consistent, where the same type of disturbance keeps reappearing in slightly different forms, wearing different surface disguises but carrying the same core pressure signature underneath. You may not be experiencing one large crisis right now. You may be experiencing something that looks far more ordinary from the outside. Repeated small frictions, repeated interruptions that arrive at precisely the wrong moment, just before something is about to move. Repeated moments of unease around specific people or decisions that you cannot fully explain, that your rational mind dismisses because there is not enough visible evidence to justify the feeling. You may be noticing that things feel slightly off even when nothing is obviously wrong. A quality of wrongness beneath the surface of situations that look fine. An undercurrent you keep registering and keep setting aside. You may be noticing that your instincts have been sending you quiet signals with increasing regularity, and that your rational mind keeps overriding them because there is not yet enough visible evidence to act on. Because the situation does not yet justify the level of alert your field keeps trying to generate. This is not a sign that your instincts are miscalibrated. This is the sign that the accumulation phase is already active, that the threshold it is building toward is closer than the surface of your life currently reveals, and that the gap between what you are sensing and what you are allowing yourself to acknowledge is itself part of the warning pattern. The Sentinels do not flag accumulation as a minor precondition that will become important later. They flag it as the most critical phase in the entire warning sequence, because accumulation is the phase where the receiver still has the clearest view and the most available response options. What happens in accumulation determines whether the receiver arrives at the threshold with awareness intact, with field posture correctly oriented, with enough interpretive clarity to navigate what is building, or arrives at it blindsided, still holding the story that the signs were random, still unprepared for the pressure that has been building underneath ordinary life for longer than they gave it credit for. The pattern was always readable. The question is only whether it was read in time. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary tension. It is the moment your system stops dismissing what has already begun. If this transmission put language around a pressure you have been carrying without explanation, the Arcturian interference log 7 signs your frequency is compromised was created for this exact stage. It is not another warning for the sake of fear. It is a direct guide for identifying whether the signs around you point to interference, escalation, compromised frequency, or a threshold you can no longer afford to misread. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The second thing the Sentinels recognize is what they classify as signal distortion, before visible disruption. This is the point in the warning sequence where the receiver begins to feel that their own perception is slightly unreliable. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that raises obvious flags or suggests something is clinically wrong, but in the quieter, more insidious way where you keep second-guessing yourself right before a decision that matters. Where you feel certain about something one moment and genuinely uncertain about the same thing an hour later, with no new information to account for the shift. Where your clarity seems to have developed a frequency problem, present for stretches, then suddenly interrupted, then partially restored, then interrupted again, in a rhythm that does not correspond to anything happening in your external circumstances. Where you feel like the precise moment you most need your inner signal to be sharp and readable is exactly the moment it becomes most difficult to access. That experience is not a personal failure. It is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are losing your ability to trust yourself. That is what the Sentinels specifically identify as interference pressing against the signal clarity of a receiver field from the inside. Distortion does not begin at the visible outer edge of a field. It begins in the interior. It begins in the quality of perception itself, in the way you register information, in the texture of your own certainty, long before it manifests as visible confusion in external circumstances. If you have been experiencing moments of unusual mental static, moments where the path ahead keeps blurring even though you believed you had clarity just days before, moments where your own inner voice sounds less distinct than it normally does, moments where you reach for a knowing you are certain you had and find it slightly harder to locate, you are not losing your discernment. Your discernment is intact. You are in a field that is under structural pressure, and pressure distorts signal. The distortion is a symptom. It is not the diagnosis. The pressure operating behind the distortion is. The third recognition carries a specific danger that the Sentinels flag with particular emphasis. It is what they classify as false stabilization. Understanding this phase is critical because it is the one most likely to cause a receiver to lower their field awareness at the exact moment when that awareness is most necessary. False stabilization is the interval within an active warning sequence where things seem to smooth out briefly, where the pressure appears to lift, where you move through a few days or even a week or two of relative ease, following a cluster of disturbances, and your system begins to produce the conclusion that the difficult stretch is behind you, that the tension has resolved, that you can exhale and return to normal operation. This conclusion feels completely justified in the moment. The evidence for it seems real. The relief is genuine. But the Sentinels classify this interval not as resolution, but as reorganization. The field is not returning to neutral. The field is redistributing pressure before the next visible wave of disturbance forms. The quiet is structural, not conclusive. It is the kind of calm that appears not at the end of a weather system, but between its most intense expressions. When the wind drops for a moment, not because the storm has passed, but because it is consolidating. Receivers who misread false stabilization as resolution do not simply miss a data point. They actively reduce their field awareness and attention during the exact interval when the field most needs them to remain present, interpretively awake, and tracking what is building beneath the apparent quiet. If you recognize this rhythm in your recent history, where something difficult settles just long enough for you to stop holding your attention on it, and then something else arrives before you have fully reset, do not dismiss that recognition. The rhythm itself is readable. That is not bad luck distributed unevenly across your timeline. That is a structural pattern inside the warning phase, and the Sentinels have precise language for it because they have tracked it across thousands of receiver fields moving through exactly this kind of convergence window. The fourth recognition is what the Sentinels classify as proximity amplification. This is where specific people, specific environments, and specific decision points in the receiver's field begin to carry a charge that feels disproportionate to the surface situation. Something feels more loaded than it should. A conversation that by all visible measures should feel neutral lands with a weight that does not match its apparent content. A space you have moved through many times before begins to carry a different quality, a pressure you did not use to notice, an atmosphere that has shifted in a way you cannot fully attribute to any visible change. A relationship that appeared stable begins to generate unusual friction, without any identifiable cause, without any specific event that explains why the texture of it has changed. A decision that should feel straightforward keeps attracting interference and complication from directions you did not anticipate. The Sentinels do not classify this pattern as emotional oversensitivity or evidence of a field that is misreading its environment. They classify it as the field accurately detecting a pressure differential that exists in actual energetic reality, one that is not visible to ordinary perception but is fully structural. Certain points in your field have become compression zones, locations where the pressure from the incoming signature concentrates because of how your field geometry intersects with what is approaching. Your heightened response to those compression zones is not irrational. It is precise detection operating exactly as designed. What makes proximity amplification particularly difficult to navigate is the social pressure that accompanies it. The conventional interpretation of these responses, the ones offered by people around you, by ordinary culture, by the part of your own mind that has been trained to locate problems inside the person rather than inside the field, is that the intensity of your response is the problem. You are told you are too sensitive, too reactive, too quick to feel tension in situations that appear perfectly ordinary to everyone else present. But the Sentinels recognize the inverse as true. The receiver who detects proximity amplification accurately and takes it seriously is not overreacting. They are reading their field with more interpretive precision than everyone around them, and the pressure differential they are registering is real, whether or not the people standing nearby have the equipment to confirm it. The fifth recognition is what the Sentinels classify as disruption clustering around activation points. And this is where the pattern becomes structurally undeniable for any receiver willing to look at it directly, rather than continuing to explain each instance separately. Activation points are the specific moments in a receiver's life where something significant is ready to move. A decision that has been forming is reaching the point of action. A change that has been gathering momentum is approaching visible expression. A new direction is beginning to consolidate from possibility into reality. A relationship is crossing a threshold into something more defining. A project or path is moving from the interior of planning into the exterior of visible commitment. These are not random moments in the timeline. These are structurally significant moments where the field is most open to trajectory change, where movement in one direction forecloses movement in another, where the consequences of what happens are largest. And these are precisely the moments where interference tends to concentrate. Not during quiet stretches, not during periods of stasis or rest. Before movement, around the exact points where something important is trying to cross from potential into actual. The Sentinels are explicit about this. Incoming pressure signatures and field interference do not distribute disruption evenly across the receiver's experience. They concentrate it at activation points, because activation points are where disruption has the most structural impact. A delay at an activation point does not just slow things down temporarily, it alters the trajectory. You likely already have evidence of this in your own history that you have not yet read as a pattern. The opportunity that collapsed at the last stage of formation, when everything had been building toward it. The momentum that was interrupted precisely when it had finally become real. The relationship that came under sudden, inexplicable pressure, right at the moment it was solidifying into something significant. The plan that attracted obstacles in concentrated clusters at the exact intervals when it was ready to move forward. These were not misfortunes distributed randomly through your experience. They were disruption events clustering at activation points. And the difference between reading that as bad luck and reading it as a structured pattern in the field is the difference between being navigable territory and navigating it. The sixth recognition is the one the Sentinels regard as the final clearly readable warning before a threshold becomes significantly harder to work with. They classify it as signal repetition before rupture. It is the phase where the same core warning appears in multiple forms across multiple areas of the receiver's life within a compressed time frame. Not the same event repeating, not the same surface disruption, but the same underlying pressure, arriving through different containers, wearing different circumstances, touching different areas of daily life, but carrying the same recognizable signature underneath all of it. The same type of relational friction appearing in more than one relationship. The same category of financial interference arriving through separate channels. The same quality of obstruction appearing at more than one activation point. The same feeling, underneath entirely different surface situations, that something is pressing from the same direction. This is not the universe distributing difficulty arbitrarily. This is signal escalation. Repetition in the warning sequence has a specific function. It is the field increasing transmission strength, because earlier signals did not produce a response. When the core warning appears across 7 separate areas of life within a narrow window of time, it is not asking you to examine 7 separate problems. It is showing you one pressure event with 7 visible expressions, and it is doing so with increasing urgency because the window for clear course correction is actively narrowing. The receivers who miss this phase are not inattentive. They are simply trained to evaluate each instance individually, and each individual instance still holds enough ordinary explanation to seem manageable on its own. The Sentinels do not evaluate warning signs in isolation. They read field patterns. And the pattern of repeated core warnings appearing in compressed succession across multiple domains is one of the most definitive readable indicators that the threshold is close and the time for low-cost navigation is shortening. Here is what the Arcturian Sentinels need you to understand with full clarity about where you stand in this moment. The incoming signature that Serelith described at the opening of this transmission is not a theoretical future event on a distant timeline. It is a present structural reality that has already made contact with the perimeter of fields carrying receiver signatures. The approach is not imminent. The contact has already occurred. What that means for you is that the entire sequence of signs you have moved through in recent weeks and months, the pressure you called stress, the disturbances you filed under coincidence, the repeated frictions you attributed to bad timing, the unease you kept explaining away, the moments of false calm that felt like resolution, but were not, all of it requires reinterpretation. Not because your original explanations were foolish, but because those explanations were made without access to what the Sentinels are currently tracking. With that information now in the field, the pattern reads differently. The signs that seemed separate are connected. The signals that seemed manageable are structured. The accumulation that seemed ordinary is not. You are not being asked to move into fear. Fear compresses the field, distorts signal further, and reduces the receiver's ability to navigate with clarity. Fear is precisely the wrong posture for this phase. What you are being asked to move into is alert precision, interpretive wakefulness, the specific quality of attention that allows you to stop hemorrhaging recognition by continuously mislabeling what is arriving. The Sentinels have assessed your pattern not as crisis, not as catastrophic breach, but as unread warning accumulation. That classification carries a specific meaning. It means the window for clear and effective navigation is still present and open. It means the field has not crossed into a state that forecloses good outcomes. But it also means the window is not static. Windows move, and the way a window closes is not through a single loud announcement. It closes the same way all of this has been building. Gradually, through pressure accumulating beneath the surface, through signs appearing that get mislabeled, through thresholds approaching that only become visible after they have already been crossed. The field around you right now is not broken. It has not failed, but it has been under sustained structural pressure for longer than you have been acknowledging. And it has been transmitting warning signals with increasing urgency through channels you have been explaining away with ordinary language. The most significant available shift in this moment is not a dramatic external action. It is an internal reorientation. From passive observation to active field awareness, from treating the signs as random noise to reading them as structured transmission, from waiting to see what the next event will be to understanding that the events already in your recent history were the message, and the message has been asking to be read. What is pressing against your field will not resolve simply because you did not give it language. Unnamed pressure does not dissipate. Unread warnings do not withdraw because they went unacknowledged. The accumulation that has been building is real and structural. The distortion in your signal clarity was not imagined. The clustering of disruptions around your activation points was not bad luck. The false calm that felt like resolution was not the end of the sequence. The repetition of core warnings through multiple channels was not coincidence. All of it was your receiver field doing precisely what it is designed to do: transmitting. Escalating signal strength when earlier transmissions were absorbed without generating response. Increasing urgency as the threshold approached. The field was never silent. It was never random. It was always transmitting with precision. The only question that has ever been open is whether the transmission was being received. It is being received now. Repeat this now if it resonates at the level where you already know it to be true. I do not dismiss the signs. I no longer call the pattern coincidence. What is pressing against my field is now being revealed. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this warning phase has already touched your life. It could be repeated pressure, strange coincidence, energetic heaviness, unexplained disruption, or the feeling that something is escalating beneath the surface. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognizes something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who keeps dismissing the signs around them. And if you are ready to recognize the warning before it escalates, subscribe to Arcturian Starseed Warning. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a warning already in motion. And this is only the beginning.